Dan Barker is co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is the nation's largest association of freethinkers, which is atheists, agnostics, and skeptics. Dan Barker has a book being released next year titled Life-Driven Purpose: How an Atheist Finds Meaning, with a foreword by Daniel Dennett, who just happened to speak at our first Darwin on the Plus in 2012. Dan Barker and the FFRF play an important role in upholding church-state separation and exposing the myth that morality can only come from religion. They promote the idea that those of us with a secular worldview can lead moral, productive, and fulfilling lives. So, now to present how Darwinism helps us be moral, join me in welcoming Dan Barker.
Well, thank you. What a pleasure to be back here in Moscow again. I was here before to do a debate, and some guy named Doug Wilson, do you know who that is? It was a conference of Calvinist clergy from all over the country, and I forget what the venue was, but the audience wasn't like a normal audience. It was all ministers, Calvinist ministers, and he invited me here to be the punching bag, I guess. He was going to show them how to debate an atheist, so that was a lot of fun. I doubt that I changed any of their minds, but it's fun. I did a debate last night down in Boise with a guy named Bill Peebles. That was his first debate, and he was good. He actually was coherent, and we hit all the points, and except the question of morality came up. And I've done this 4 or 5 times. When the opponent says that one of the evidences for God is that we have absolute moral values, we have objective moral values, so there must be a moral lawgiver, right? Because how can we have objective values? And so part of my answer to him was to turn to him and say, well, if God is the source of moral values, and we're not supposed to think for ourselves because we're incapable, we're just supposed to follow orders from God, let me ask you, if God told you to kill me, would you do it? And he basically turned around and he said, if I was sure it was God, yes, I would. What else is he going to say, actually, you know? And he said, I don't know if that would be consistent with God, and I don't know if God would ever ask me that, but if he did, and then I would. And I pointed out, well, according to the Bible, it is consistent, because the Bible has, in the God of the Bible, asked people to kill all the time, commit genocides. In fact, you should be happy to do it, not even regretfully. The Bible says in Psalm 137, you should be happy to take the babies and dash them against the stones. So he said, well, we are not smart enough. We are like children, and the father figure knows what's best. And if I disobeyed God, he said, and didn't obey his order, I could be causing more harm in the universe and in the world than if I obeyed God. So if God told me to kill you, I would have to do that, and it would be the right moral thing to do. So I turned to him and I said, well, Bill, if there's a God, and if God told me to kill you, I would tell God to go to hell. I care about you and your life and your family and human values. I care about real values in the real world enough to disobey that order. And I would be doing the moral thing. I think your moral judgment has been compromised by your faith. You don't have an ability to rationally think through moral principles. And then I turned to the audience and I asked, now, which one of us would you rather sit next to on a bus, right? I mean, that's scary when you think about it. People who think that God's going to tell them to do these things. So, morality, when I was a Christian minister, I used to think morality was this big capital M mystery. How can we be moral? What is the source of morality? As if morality were a thing, as if it were some kind of there's this reification that happens in most religions where they take a concept and it becomes a thing. Jesus said, I am the truth, as if truth were a thing that you could be, right? We know what truth is. Truth is really how well a statement matches reality. That's what truth is. If the proposition matches reality to some degree, we say it has that degree of truthfulness to it, or false. But morality, I used to think, was some big thing that we had to have given to us from outside of us. It had to be inspired from outside of the cosmos. It had to be transcendent because we are contingent beings. We exist just, we can't figure it out on our own. We don't have to exist, but God does, and He's absolute and He's objective, and so He's giving us the morality. Well, that's the command theory of morality. So, how does Darwinism help us be moral? Late 1980s, 1988 or 1989, I was flying to New York City to be a guest on the Phil Donahue show. Some of you remember Phil Donahue, national talk show host? Oh. And it was in New York City, and I was changing planes in Detroit. And the show was going to be about, and the show was about life after death. There were 5 of us scheduled to be on the panel. And there was this Bible-thumping hellfire guy. There was this sort of universalist minister. There was a Wiccan priestess. There was somebody, and then I was the atheist, clear over on the edge here. But before getting there, I was in Detroit changing planes, waiting to get in the gate. And I don't know what I was thinking about. I was just, maybe thinking about the show. But there was a line of people in the next gate over here. They were waiting to get on another flight. And I wasn't paying much attention, but I must have seen out of the corner of my eye this young couple that had a little baby in a baby carrier. And they had put it up like on top of the stack of luggage on top of this carrier. It was about like this off the ground. And the father must have wandered away or left or something, because the corner of my eye, without any real concentration, the corner of my eye saw that baby kick and that carrier roll off the top of the luggage toward that hard floor, and I watched myself do this. And I caught that thing with my fingertips as it was turning and grabbed it just in time, and about a second later, the mother grabbed the other side, and she would have been too late, but we were both hanging on to this. And what I said to her was, "That was scary." And I almost didn't want to give the baby back, but it was scary. But what was interesting about that is that it was like I was watching myself act. Why did I do that? You would have done the same thing, most of you. Most of you would have done exactly the same thing, right? You don't want to see a baby fall, but you're not thinking about it. It's not something that I wasn't standing there thinking, oh, there are going to be some consequences in a moment, and I need to evaluate the relative merits of my action according to my moral philosophy. I wasn't standing there thinking about Joseph Smith or Muhammad or Jesus or how can I bring glory to God by doing good in the world. I wasn't thinking about any of that. I don't know what I was thinking about it, but it wasn't that. I wasn't thinking about reciprocal altruism. When I grabbed the baby thing, I didn't look up to that woman and say, "Okay, lady, I did you a good deed, now you owe me one." None of that was going through my mind. It wasn't any calculations. There was no, it was just a biological thing that happened. It was an instinctive thing that happened. It wasn't irrational, it was like pre-rational. It was just one of these things that you do. And you've all had that happen in your life, haven't you? With things. Of course, when you stick your hand on the fire, you don't have to, when you stick your hand on a hot stove, you don't go, "Oh, those cells are being destroyed." And if I continue with the destruction of those cells, that would not be conducive toward the well-being of this organism. I suppose I should remove my hand. We naturally recoil, right, from things that threaten us and harm us. So we are born with basic instincts that we have inherited from our ancestors that we don't think about. It was a pre-rational, instinctive thing that happened. And by the way, you should have seen the look that woman gave to her husband after that. That was like, and when the line was going, she picked up the baby and she just held it. She held this baby. And as they were going through the gate, at the very last minute, she just sort of turned around and looked at me with no expression. She just kind of like, which I kind of took to mean thank you, And of course, you don't need thanks for something like that. That wasn't courageous. That was nothing. That wasn't me deciding it. I think what that was, it was my ancestors deciding that. And we evolved. We're evolved organisms, and it isn't just our thumb, opposable thumb, that evolved. Isn't just our metabolism that evolved. It isn't just, all these other features about us. Our brains also evolved, and our brains evolved with adaptations, with survivability. Our brains and our thoughts also evolved. And I think it's taken a long time for even some scientists to come to grips with the fact that it's not just our bodies, but it's our personalities and our thinking that has also evolved because of decisions made by our ancestors. So, have you ever seen these cartoons where the person's trying to decide what to do, and on this shoulder there's this devil, and on this shoulder there's an angel? You've seen that, and they're, should I do this? Should I do that? The better angels or the worse angels of our nature? That's a cartoon. It's an oversimplification, but I think it points to something that we do have moral dilemmas in our lives when something that we want to do conflicts with something that we think we should do or that society wants us to do. So we're conflicted. We have these dilemmas. So how do we decide to do the right thing? What does it mean to be moral? What does that actually mean? I think religious morality misses the boat. I think you can make a strong case that religion and faith actually compromises moral judgment. And I've had this conversation, I'm sure a lot of you have as well, with believers, just like Bill last night, saying, if God told me to kill you, I would. His moral judgment is compromised because his faith requires that whatever God says or does is good by definition. He has sacrificed his own ability to reason. And if you look at the actions of the God of the Bible, for example, suppose I did a debate at the University of Wisconsin with Dinesh D'Souza. You know who that is. Dinesh and I have done 8 debates together, and that's it. No more. I don't know if I want to be on the same stage with him. Have you heard some of the stuff about Dinesh recently in the news? Not just the scandal over his divorce. I met the woman, actually. We were in Messiah College in Pennsylvania that very week when the scandal hit. And we were sitting in the president of Messiah College dining room for a pre-dinner before the debate. And it's a huge dining room. There's probably 40 people in there. And we were talking, and I was the only atheist in the room. And these Christian organizers, and it was friendly in that, and we were at the table with Dinesh, and eventually I looked over and I said, well, there's a young woman sitting next to him, and I had met his family in California a couple years before, so I looked up at her and I said, oh, are you Dinesh's daughter? And he looked up, she's my fiance. And the Christian guy next to me, the organizer, kind of raised his eyebrows. He told me he was bringing his assistant. And they only needed one hotel room, and she doesn't look like an assistant, Well, you heard that he got fired as the president of King's College, and that was like October the 2nd, and October the 4th, he basically announced that he was filing for divorce from his wife in California, wherever that was. So, darn it, I should have got up during the debate and said something about that. I should have said, congratulations, Dinesh, I've met your fiance, I'm really happy. And I wasn't moralistic about it. I actually went up to him and said, well, this is good. I'm not going to judge. I mean, their marriage and their life is fine. But there's a certain hypocrisy there, isn't there? He writes all these books about the evidence of the moral decay of American society as divorce and infidelity and adultery and all that stuff. So he can live his life the way he wants to, but if he's going to say one thing and live it another way, that's being a hypocrite. But during one of our debates in the University of Wisconsin, I announced to the audience that I'm going to prove to you, you believers. It was about 50-50. Kind of neat in Madison, because Madison, Wisconsin is, I bet half of Madison, Wisconsin are atheists. I mean, almost everybody I meet are non-believers. So the crowd was about 50-50. There were about 1,500 people there. And I said to the crowd, suppose I were to break into the home of this loving Christian family. They go to church, they pray, mom and dad and a couple of kids and some pets. They're faithful in prayer, they believe the Bible, they're really good people, and I were to tie them up and burn them with cigarettes and shoot the dog and drown the cat and burn the house down and kill them all, and the police were to ask me, Dan, why did you do that? And I were to say, no reason, the devil made me do it. How many of you would think I would be a moral monster? How many of you would call me a moral monster for doing that? Virtually every hand went up, right? Anyone who does that, something's wrong with them. I mean, that's horrible. Then I opened the Bible to the book of Job. And in Job chapter 2, verse 3, there's this verse where God's talking to Satan. I don't know, what do they have, coffee once a week or something? But Satan and his, they're called the sons of God, which I guess is a way of talking about demons or angels, came up to God, and this happened twice. And God said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? He's perfect. He's righteous. There's no one like him. Job is a perfect in his faith. And Satan said, yeah, but I bet if things were going wrong, he wouldn't be perfect in his faith. And God said to Satan, Job is perfect, but you caused me to destroy him for no reason. The King James says without cause, but for no reason. So Job, his 10 children were killed. A wind came and Satan blew down this wall and killed them all. All of his livestock were killed. It didn't say if he had a dog or a cat, but the animals were all killed. And then he was tortured, and he was physically tortured with the boils or whatever it was. And Job admitted, God has destroyed me. Why has God destroyed me? Even the author of the book of Job says that God had destroyed him. So if the police come up to God and say, God, why did you do this to Job? No reason, the devil made me do it. And I ask that audience, now raise your hand if you think the God of the Bible is a moral monster. And only about half the hands went up. And doesn't that tell you something? The exact situation, the exact words, and that's what the Bible says. In one case, you're able to exercise clear moral judgment. Yeah, Dan is a moral monster for doing that. But when God does the same thing, that very God of the Bible, suddenly, oh wait, we can't criticize God. Their moral judgment has been seriously compromised. And there are stories after stories after stories of, in the Bible, here's just one more. And there are hundreds of them like this. But the Ten Commandments are supposed to be the great guide. The Ten Commandments are supposed to give us our moral code, right? I actually don't think we need a moral code. I think moral codes are dangerous. What we need are moral principles. A code is something that you have to follow, but humanists would say we have moral principles. But the Ten Commandments, supposedly, depending on which of the three versions that there are in the book of Exodus, they were inscribed on stone, and God wrote with his finger on these tablets these 10 commandments to the world, and they're very important. And that document was a very special document, and it was put in this thing called the Ark of the Covenant. And it was the national document for the nation of Israel. It'd be like maybe our U.S. Constitution or something. You know, there it is. This is who we are as a country. Well, the Philistines came, and they captured it. Maybe they were playing capture the flag or something. The Philistines, you know, they were Mediterranean, and they came under the coast, and then they were attacking. And the Philistines, who were David and Goliath. David was fighting the Philistines. It was those people. So they captured the Ark of the Covenant. They took it away from the rightful Israelites. They took it away, and they took it over to the coast. But the Philistines were having problems. There were all these plagues and problems that were happening, and they thought, you know, maybe we shouldn't have stolen this sacred document from the Israelites. Maybe we should give it back, but how do we know if we should or not? So what the Philistines did was they took a cow. Was it one or two cows? Who remembers that? One, at least there's one cow. They hooked it up to a cart, and they put the Ark of the Covenant on this cart. And then the cow had just given birth, and the calf was crying over there. The calf was crying for its mama. And they said, okay, if the cow goes to the mama, then we know it's not really God's ark. But if the cow takes it back to its rightful owners, then we know that it is. Sure enough, the cows ignored the babies and started going across the country. And you can just see this picture. Here comes this lone cow pulling a cart across. And as they get close to where the Israelites were living, they come up to this little town called Beth Shemesh. And Beth Shemesh actually is the house of a Babylonian god named Shamash is the name of it. But Beth Shemesh, these farmers are out there working outside of Beth Shemesh, and then they say, "What's that? What's coming? What is that?" And they look, and that's weird. Here comes a cow by itself pulling this cart. And they look, what is on there? It's the ark. It's coming back. Our document, our wonderful commands for living are coming back to us. Praise God. And they were all happy. I mean, wouldn't you be happy if somebody stole the Constitution and then we got it back from whoever stole it? They looked at it, and is it really the ark? And they touched it, and they looked. It is the Ark of the Covenant. And so naturally what they did was they broke up the cart and made a fire, and they sacrificed the cow. I mean, that's what you do when you're praising God. And then the smoke went up into the nostrils of God so that God could be happy. And the whole village and the whole city was saying, "Yes, we've got the ark back. It's back. It's wonderful. Thank you, God. This is great news." So what did God do? Do you know the story? Not only did he kill those farmers, because they touched it. You weren't supposed to touch it or look at it. It was against God's law to touch the ark or to look at it. Not only did he kill those farmers, but the Bible says he killed 50,000 people in Beth Shemesh. He punished them because they weren't worshiping the right way. Suppose one of my daughters were to write me a birthday card. "Happy birthday, Daddy. I love you," but she spelled love L-U-V. And I were to say, "You made a mistake. You didn't properly respect me. I'm your father. I need to be honored and respected properly, and you made a mistake. You didn't do it right. 50,000 people in Moscow have to die." Are there 50,000 people in Moscow? Oh. Well, there weren't even 50,000 people in Beth Shemesh, by the way. That's one of the indications that the story is a myth, because there were no towns that big, but the Bible says it was 50. Jerusalem at that time of history had maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people. So there's one clue that this story is being made up later. Why? Why would they make up that story? What in the world is a stupid story like that doing in the Bible? You know why? You know why they weren't supposed to look in the ark? Because there was nothing there. There were no 10 Commandments. There were no original documents. And once a year, the high priest got to go into the tabernacle and then come out and say, "I looked at it." But nobody else got to see it. And so that story was written to scare the people. Don't you dare ask or look where the actual 10 Commandments are. I mean, if you were God and you were going to write down on a tablet or, actually write on a physical document with your finger the rules for all of humanity to live by, why do it on something so fragile? In fact, the first two were just broken. Why do it on something so small that you could steal? Why not take the commands for moral living in the 10 Commandments and write them on the moon in huge letters? I mean, wouldn't that be a sign? We could still see them now. We could get, maybe not even with a telescope, we could look up and see it. But obviously the 10 Commandments never existed, and it was just a story written to scare. But is that moral? Is that something a good, loving father would do to loving children who are trying to worship and thank him in a way? There are story after story after story about religious morality that shows that really there's no moral judgment involved. The book of Job and the story of Beth Shemesh really boil down to submit and obey the orders of the parent figure, the father figure. That's what morality is in religion. Because you are a toddler. You can't think for yourself. Sure, when you're raising your children, they're little kids, and they're going to start running out into the street, you're going to grab them and stop them, right? And even if they don't want to be stopped, you as a parent, you're going to stop them. And if the little kid turns around to you and says, "But Daddy, why can't I run out in the street?" And if I were to say, "The reason you can't run out of the street is because I said so. And I need to be respected. I need to be honored. And if you run out on the street, you are disobeying me, and my holiness and my character has been offended. And if you offend me, then you have to be punished." Is that what you would tell your kid? what would you tell them? Why shouldn't they run out in the street? They could get hurt, right? That's what morality is. Morality is not obeying. Morality is not submitting. Of course, we tell that to children when they're young, before they can develop their own moral philosophy and way of thinking. But eventually the child grows up. And even if the kid doesn't understand why there's danger out in the traffic, at least you can explain it to another adult. I mean, at least you have good reasons for why. And the reason have nothing to do with the authority of the parent. The reason has to do with real harm in the real world. So, picture the cartoon with a devil on one side and an angel on the other. In my new book coming out that Steve told you about, Life-Driven Purpose, the second chapter there, I'm calling it Mere Morality. And you know how C.S. Lewis wrote his book, Mere Christianity? He made this attempt, and Mere Christianity is still a big seller. He made this attempt to strip Christianity of all the non-essentials to get down to the mere Christianity, to get down to the basic essence, peel back all the layers of the onion of stuff that don't really matter that much, but what is the actual core? So, paralleling C.S. Lewis, my chapter is called Mere Morality. What is basic morality? Morality can be more than the floor. Morality can be more than the base. But what are we talking about when we're talking about morality? And if I had had time when that baby was falling, if I had known that it was going to happen 5 or 10 minutes before it happened, then I could have engaged in some kind of an analysis, right? But I think, and this is an oversimplification, and it's just sort of a visual model of how I think most of us non-believers handle moral questions. I think we can replace the image on one shoulder with instinct. An image on this shoulder we can replace with law, and in the middle with reason, our own minds, reason. Reason, of course, is preeminent. So using reason, if you have time, most humanists, most secular humanists, and as an atheist, I can't speak for all atheists. Some atheists might have a different moral philosophy than I, or you might have a different one. But if your intention is to act in such a way that the result has less harm, if you're trying to minimize actual harm in the real world, then that's what a moral decision is. That's what morality means. Morality doesn't mean flattering the ego of the parent. It doesn't mean following the test and following the commands exactly. Morality is a real-world thing. Morality is the attempt to minimize harm or to lessen harm. The operative principle here, the operative word is the word harm. What is harm? Harm, whatever it is material. We are biological organisms living in a natural environment. We bump into things. Things threaten us. Things get in our way. You name it. Natural disasters or illnesses or diseases or predators or war or a lack of food or whatever. The things that threaten our survival, which would cause harm to us, are the things that we naturally avoid. Sometimes we don't even think about it. You pull your hand out of the fire, right? That's an instinctive thing that happens. When I reached for that baby, it was an instinctive biological thing that was happening. It was not the result of a rational decision. If you have time to think about it, then what you do is, well, I have this action and I have this action. You have more than one action you're contemplating. What are the consequences of those actions? And what are the relative merits of the consequences of those actions as to how much harm is going to result in the end? And so mere morality would say, use the harm principle to see if you can pick a path that results in the least amount of overall harm, real harm in the world. But we have help. Not only this mind, we have our own mind, which is what we think with. This is us. This is you and me. We have this reason that we can try to do that with. We try to be as informed as we can about the consequences. And if you're not as informed as you can, then you get educated. And you might make a mistake. You might pick the wrong choice, but then learn from that. So it's a learning process as well. But not only do we have our own minds, we also have these other two minds on our shoulders. On this shoulder, we have the mind. It's not a real mind. I mean, it's not like we have three little minds, but it's a model. The instinct, pretty much, when it comes to morality, the instincts we have are the result of the actions and decisions made by the minds of our ancestors. Those ancestors who didn't decide to catch falling babies were less likely to reproduce into the future to produce you and me. Those ancestors who didn't care about babies falling from trees or from whatever, we're going to, on average, have fewer offspring. But those ancestors who did make that decision to protect the offspring, and of course, we all think that parental instinct is a really strong thing, right? Well, it's strong because otherwise we wouldn't be here. It's strong not because there's some cosmic value to it. It's strong because it's the fittest. It's how we happen to survive. And Darwinism gives us a model for that. Darwinism shows how even those instincts that we have, that we don't even think about, are the result of natural selection. So instinct can be a very good guide, but the problem you see is that you have this shoulder fighting with this shoulder. You have you have something that you want to do and something else that you think that you should do to minimize overall harm. And often the reason for that is that we now live in a different environment from which our ancestors evolved in. So an instinctive thing that our ancestors would have found very useful may not be as useful today in the environment in which we live. And that happens in many situations. So instinct is a guide. Sometimes you just know what the right thing is to do. Sometimes your moral choices are just evident to you without even thinking about it. And you can thank your ancestors. Your ancestors thought it through. They weren't necessarily passing that down to you, but the fact that they had offspring that it resulted in you means that you have inherited from them those tendencies, which leans toward protecting your offspring. On this shoulder, we have a different kind of a mind. Not your own mind, not the mind of your ancestors, but the collective mind of the society that we live in. It's called law. Laws can be bad, laws can be good, but the advantage of law is that it can be pre-thought, can be pre-analyzed. The speed limit, for example. I don't know why they would pick a certain number for the speed limit, but we would assume, if it's a good law, that there are some rational principles involved in the speed limit. The coefficient of the road surface and the safety of the automobiles and the average driving habits of the average driver. There's all these things that would factor into it. And so on principle, I'm going to obey the speed limit unless there's some overriding moral reason to break the speed limit. If I've got a choking baby in the back seat, I'm going to speed to the hospital. I'm going to break that law deliberately. So what mere morality would say is that we don't need commands from a God. We don't need a daddy telling us what to do. What we can do is use our reason to look at the instincts that we have, see if they fit or not, respect them. It's like your instincts would be like asking for advice from the minds of your ancestors. I feel like doing this because it comes prepackaged. Respect the law. Sometimes in some societies, laws are bad, especially if they're motivated by, something other than the common welfare. So using mind and using the mind of the collective society and of instinct, putting all those together with the intention of ending up with less overall harm than before, that is what morality means. That's mere morality. That's like a passing grade. That's like your driver's permit. And we can all go beyond that. We can all, if you want, you can choose to become compassionate and charitable and go beyond. I don't think you have to be necessarily a charitable, compassionate person to be moral. If you're living your life in the mere basic attempt not to cause unnecessary harm, then you're a moral person. I don't think there's a charity imperative. I don't think there's a compassion imperative. But I think on the bell curve of human distribution, a lot of us fall over here, and we can't help it. We have to be altruistic. It's good for our species. It's good for our society. Some of you, and don't raise your hand, if you see cruelty to animals, imagine some horribly cruel thing that somebody is doing to animals. Some of you will break out in tears. No, don't do that. If you're like my sister-in-law, you'll break out in a rage. But some of you are over here on the bell curve, and it doesn't bother you that much. And in fact, there's a few people, and I doubt there's any in this room, but there's a few people who enjoy seeing animals suffer. I think there's a variation either through natural variety or through like mental illness. There's some people that their brains are compromised, don't have those natural feelings. But most of us fall somewhere in the middle of all these. If you're walking by a river and you see somebody out in the river yelling, "I'm drowning, help me, I'm drowning," what should you do? What do you think? What should you do? If somebody's out in the river and they're drowning, "Help, I'm drowning," what should you do? Save them? You would want to. Yeah, you would want to. If you're like me, you would want to. You might find it hard not to jump in, right? Because there's something in most of us that we care about people that are suffering and hurting. But maybe that's not what you should do. How far out is the person? How strong is that current? How good of a swimmer am I? How many children am I responsible for supporting? Would it make sense to have 2 deaths instead of 1? Maybe the most moral thing to do is not to jump in, but to go get help or something. In fact, I have a friend who's a lifeguard who told me, in most cases, don't. Really, to save someone's life, and in that case, you need somebody who knows what they're doing. You can make things worse. But I think all of us in this room agree that we have this impulse, don't we, to want to help somebody who's in need. We have this social instinct that was built into us that wants to do that. So moral dilemmas arise when we have a conflict between our instincts and which are directing us in one way and what society or law or social expectations or culture expects of us in another way. And that's tough. If it weren't for that dilemma, we wouldn't need morality. We would all just do what we do. But the fact that we are conflicted about what the course of action is. If you're using the harm principle, the harm principle doesn't tell you what to do. The harm principle is like a compass. And a compass doesn't tell you where to go. A compass doesn't even tell you where you are. The compass just points to north. And so the harm principle is like a compass that just points north would be minimize harm, away from harm, away from, sometimes in order to get north, though, there's obstacles, and sometimes you have to go east or west to get there, and sometimes you even have to go south. We all agree, I think we all agree, that it's a bad idea to take a long, sharp needle and poke it into a baby, unless that baby needs a life-saving injection. Then you'll do that. You'll cause the pain. You'll make the baby cry. The baby won't understand it. You're going to cause that harm because the overall goal is to end up with less harm. So sometimes we have to cause harm to minimize harm. And that's where moral dilemmas come. Well, what should I do? You've probably all gone to a Philosophy 101 class where they give these scenarios, very unlikely scenarios, but and it's a good thing we don't live our lives in these scenarios or we'd all go crazy. But you come up to a burning building, and there's 2 doors, and there's 10 children here screaming, "Let me out, let me out." And over here, there's 1 child screaming. And you only have a split second. You can only choose one of those doors, and the whole thing's going to go. You've got to pick one of those 2 doors. Which door do you pick? The one with the 10 or the one with the 1? Why would you pick the one with the 10? By picking the one with the 10, you're harming that door with the 1, aren't you? So why would you pick the 10? Yeah, less harm. You're saving more people. You would regret leaving that child. You'd feel really bad about it. It wouldn't be a good thing to do, but the rational calculation would be to minimize harm, you would pick the door with 10. But now change one little fact. Suppose that kid behind the door is your kid. Then what do you do? This kid that you've loved and hugged and sung lullabies to, and you've promised this kid that you would take care of him, and there's your kid, the one kid behind the door, saying, "Mommy, Daddy, save me." Which door then do you pick? Are you conflicted about it or what? we would all pick our own kid, wouldn't we? And the parents of those other 10 know that they would have done the same thing. That parental instinct is so powerful. I don't know if you would suspend this rational thought and you think, well, I have this instinctive. So you're having a fight within you between what your instinct is telling you and what your reason is telling you. Sometimes your reason is telling you to make these cold calculations, but it's the wrong choice. So, you heard of the trolley problem, haven't you? Where if you turn the switch, the train is going to not hit those 5 people, but it's going to hit that one person. But by turning the switch, are you guilty of murdering that one person? What's your moral responsibility? Or the variant of it is that you're on a bridge going over the track, and there's this incredibly heavy person standing there, and if you push them over, they'll stop the trolley and save the lives. So, I think what this illustrates is that there is no right answer in every moral choice. There's something in us that wants, like Abby was saying, there's something in us that wants to have the right answer. We want to have a certain answer. And this drive to have an always correct moral answer to something can drive us crazy because what does it mean to have a correct moral answer? If you're going by pure reason, you would pick the door with 10 over 1. But if you're using instinct as a guide, or if you're using law as a guide, it might even point you in a different direction. What if there was a law it was related in some way? So in my thinking, mere morality basically is trying to live your life in such a way that you are intending to minimize real harm in the real world. And whatever that is, whatever it is, it's material. It's a biological thing that's threatening us in some way. So using rejecting the bad moral compromise, the judgment, this compromise of religion, removes an obstacle from our thinking, so where we can use our real minds and our real instinct and the minds of society around us to make informed moral decisions. So Darwinism, in a sense, helps us be moral if we do have some respect for our instincts. And I used to be a preacher. I could talk forever. Did you know the word reverend was a typo? Because the first letter used to be an N. So I'm going to quit there, and I think Steve or somebody wants to open it up to questions. Is that right? All right, thank you.